250 million years ago, the ancestors of every crocodile alive today did not crawl. Some of them stood upright. Some of them ran on two legs. And for millions of years, they were among the most successful predators on Earth. The first great hunter to emerge after the worst mass extinction in our planet's history was not a dinosaur. It was a crocodile relative more than 6 meters, which is about 20 feet long, with jaws powerful enough to crush bone. For the next 30 million years, the crocodile side of the family tree was winning. They evolved into more species, filled more ecological roles, and spread across more environments, while the earliest dinosaurs remained small players in a much larger world. One crocodile relative developed a toothless beak, tiny forelimbs, and long running legs. It looked so much like an ostrich dinosaur that its fossils sat inside a museum for almost 60 years before anyone realized they had been looking at the wrong family tree. Then, in South Korea, fossil footprints revealed something even stranger. 110 million years ago, right in the middle of the Age of Dinosaurs, a crocodile relative was still walking across the landscape on two legs. The crocodiles we know today are patient ambush hunters waiting beside rivers, but they are only the final surviving branch of a lineage that once experimented with almost every body plan evolution could invent. Before we continue, a quick like or subscribe helps keep these documentaries coming. And whether you're listening from bed, the couch, or somewhere on the road, I'm glad you're here. Settle down and let's go back to a world where crocodiles had not yet chosen the water. The ground did not welcome new life all at once. It carried the marks of loss across every horizon, as though the planet itself had paused between one chapter and the next. Around 252 million years ago, the event now known as the Great Dying swept across Earth with a force unmatched in the fossil record, leaving behind landscapes where familiar rhythms had disappeared and countless ecological roles stood empty. Its origin reached deep beneath what is now Siberia. There, volcanic eruptions burst through the crust again and again for roughly 1 million years, pouring immense rivers of molten rock across the surface. Those eruptions released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, and other harmful gases into the atmosphere. Oceans absorbed part of that burden, while the air above continued to change, and the balance that had supported life for millions of years slipped away. The seas responded first. Water temperatures climbed, oxygen levels dropped, and broad regions became starved of the oxygen needed by complex organisms. Marine ecosystems unraveled with astonishing speed. Scientists estimate that between 90 and 96% of marine species disappeared. On land, forests withered as climate patterns shifted, and about 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species also vanished. The losses reached nearly every branch of life, leaving only scattered survivors to inherit an altered world. Earlier ages had belonged largely to the synapsids, the distant relatives of mammals. Sail-backed hunters such as Dimetrodon had become symbols of that earlier dominance, while sturdy tusked dicynodonts grazed across broad plains. Their long reign had shaped ecosystems for countless generations. After the catastrophe, those great dynasties fractured. A handful endured, though their influence had been greatly diminished, and the familiar order that had once governed the continents dissolved into uncertainty. Recovery unfolded at a pace measured in millions of years. Around 5 million years passed before ecosystems approached a stable balance again, and nearly 30 million years were needed before terrestrial communities regained their former richness. Across that immense stretch of time, predators, herbivores, scavengers, insect eaters, and river hunters all represented opportunities waiting to be claimed. Evolution found itself facing a landscape that resembled an untouched canvas, where countless possibilities remained available. Among the survivors was a lineage of reptiles whose future had scarcely been hinted at before the disaster. These were the archosaurs. Their earliest members began diversifying into forms suited for climbing, running, hunting, and exploring environments left vacant by extinction. Their expansion became one of the fastest evolutionary radiations ever recorded on land, filling spaces that had stood open since the world was remade. The division within that lineage came with surprising speed. One branch gradually led toward the animals that would later become dinosaurs. The other followed the path that eventually produced crocodiles. At this early moment, neither side carried the fame it would one day receive. They were neighboring experiments sharing the same recovering planet, each testing different solutions as forests returned, rivers shifted, and food webs slowly reassembled. Across this renewed Earth, the race to occupy an emptied world had already begun, and the crocodile lineage reached many of those opportunities first. Across the floodplains of late Triassic North America, one shadow stretched farther than the rest. It belonged to an animal that has often been mistaken in spirit for a dinosaur, even though its ancestry followed a different path. Around 227 million to 208 million years ago, Postosuchus kirkpatricki stood among the dominant hunters of its age, carrying the confidence of a lineage that had already mastered life on land. Its body reached about 6 meters in length, which is about 20 feet, and it stood well over 1 meter tall at the hip, which is about 3 feet. Estimates suggest a weight exceeding 300 kilograms, which is about 661 pounds. Those proportions created a predator with tremendous strength, supported by long limbs that carried its body in an upright posture. Although it moved on 4 legs, its stance differed greatly from the sprawling gait associated with modern crocodilians. The animal received its name from Post Quarry in the present day state of Texas, where numerous fossils revealed its presence. Paleontologist Sankar Chatterjee formally described the species during the 1980s, bringing together evidence of a creature whose skeleton blended power with surprising agility. Every newly recovered bone reinforced the picture of a land predator built for commanding broad territories where few rivals challenged its place. The skull formed the center of that design. Deep jaws framed rows of serrated teeth that compressed prey from side to side before slicing into flesh. Strong muscles anchored behind the head delivered crushing force with every bite. This was an anatomy shaped for seizing large animals and holding them firmly until escape became impossible. Bones recovered from the stomach region of one remarkable specimen offered a direct glimpse into that lifestyle. Inside that fossilized meal rested remains from several different animals. Paleontologists identified fragments belonging to an armored atasaur, a distant mammal relative known as a cynodont, a tusked dicynodont, and possibly a giant amphibian called a temnospondyle. The collection painted the portrait of a hunter with little interest in specialization. Whatever suitable prey crossed its path could become part of its next meal, revealing an ecosystem where opportunity often outweighed preference. Smaller dinosaurs already wandered those same landscapes. Among them was Colophysis, a lightly built predator reaching about 3 meters in length, which is about 10 feet. Fast and agile though it may have been, it occupied a world where Postosuchus towered above it. In places where both animals lived together, the crocodile relative represented the highest level of terrestrial predation, while the early dinosaur may itself have needed to avoid becoming prey. Many writers have compared Postosuchus with Tyrannosaurus rex, calling it the Triassic equivalent of that later giant. The comparison reflects its ecological role more than close relationship. Both possessed massive skulls, commanding bites, and positions at the summit of their food webs. One belonged to the dinosaur lineage, the other stood firmly within Rawasuchia, a branch of crocodile-lined archosaurs that dominated terrestrial predator niches across much of the Triassic world. Its appearance in the documentary series Walking with Dinosaurs, in the episode New Blood, introduced millions of viewers to this formidable animal and helped reshape public imagination about the age before dinosaur dominance. Fossils continue to affirm that the highest hunter of this landscape carried the heritage of crocodiles. Its upright stride hinted that even more unusual forms were already beginning to emerge within the same remarkable family. A hillside in what is now North Carolina preserved the outline of an animal that seemed to stand between two different worlds. Buried within the Pekin Formation for roughly 231 million years, its bones waited until paleontologists uncovered one of the oldest known members of the lineage leading toward modern crocodiles. They named it Carnifex carolinensis. The first word comes from Latin and means butcher, while the second honors the region where it rested for ages beyond memory. Carnifex appeared close to the beginning of crocodilomorph history, occupying a place near the root of the family tree that would eventually produce every living crocodilian. Its importance reaches beyond its age alone. The skeleton captures an evolutionary moment when the crocodile lineage was still exploring possibilities before later descendants settled into the familiar body shape seen along rivers and wetlands today. Unlike those modern descendants, Carnifex carried itself on two powerful hind limbs. Its forelimbs remained comparatively small, leaving the hindquarters responsible for most of its movement across the landscape. That upright posture allowed it to travel with long strides, raising its head well above surrounding vegetation as it searched for prey. The image contrasts sharply with the broad-bodied ambush hunters of the present, revealing how flexible crocodile evolution already was near its beginning. Its skull tells an equally fascinating story. Long and narrow, it displayed raised ridges and sculpted crests across the surface, giving the head a distinctive appearance. Just in front of each eye sat a large opening in the skull. Paleontologists call this the antorbital opening, a natural window in the bones between the eye and the snout. This feature appeared widely among early archosaurs, reducing skull weight while leaving space for soft tissues connected to breathing and facial anatomy. The rest of the skeleton blended characteristics that usually belonged to different groups. Some bones resembled those of the larger Rawasuchians, already ruling the landscape. Others anticipated features found in later crocodilomorphs, while a few echoed traits also seen among early dinosaurs. This mixture transformed Carnifex into an evolutionary bridge, preserving clues about how one form gradually shifted toward another without sudden leaps or sharp boundaries. Its environment supported several formidable hunters at once. Early theropod dinosaurs already stalked the same forests and floodplains, pursuing prey beside this newly evolving crocodile relative. Members of the research team described the scene as a predator pileup where multiple large carnivores occupied overlapping roles within a single ecosystem. Such coexistence reminds us that the rise of one lineage did not immediately erase another. Different branches could flourish together while natural selection continued shaping each path. Carnifex therefore changes more than a single chapter in crocodile history. At roughly 231 million years old, it demonstrates that upright movement on two legs emerged very early within the crocodile lineage. This was no isolated experiment appearing near the end of its evolutionary journey. It belonged to the opening pages, suggesting that the ancestors of crocodiles began testing bipedal locomotion almost as soon as their lineage separated from its closest relatives. The Carolina butcher carried sharp teeth and the instincts of a hunter, yet it represented only one expression of what crocodile relatives could become. Evolution still held many unused designs, and some later descendants exchanged flesh for leaves, replacing formidable jaws with something far more unexpected. Some discoveries spend decades in plain sight before anyone recognizes what they truly are. In the desert landscape of Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, one fossil followed exactly that path, carrying its secret through generations of museum shelves before finally revealing a completely unexpected chapter in crocodile evolution. The story began in 1947 when the celebrated paleontologist Edwin Colbert collected fossils from Ghost Ranch, a place already famous for containing the remains of countless Coelophysis dinosaurs. Among those discoveries lay a skeleton wrapped inside a protective plaster jacket. It was transported to the American Museum of Natural History, cataloged, and placed into storage. There it remained for nearly 60 years, unopened and largely forgotten, while paleontology advanced around it. Its long sleep ended during 2006. Graduate student Sterling Nesbitt was searching through old plaster blocks in hopes of uncovering additional Coelophysis material. As he carefully opened one package, the bones emerging from the rock immediately seemed unfamiliar. Their proportions refused to match the dinosaur skeleton he expected. Recognizing that something extraordinary had appeared, he tracked down every plaster jacket collected from the same excavation site and patiently assembled the scattered remains into a single animal. The completed skeleton measured about 2 meters in length, which is about 7 feet. It possessed a graceful neck, slender hind limbs, tiny forelimbs, and a completely toothless beak. Its overall silhouette appeared strikingly bird-like, almost as though an ostrich had exchanged feathers for scales. Nothing about its appearance suggested the broad, low profile associated with living crocodilians. Instead, it presented an elegant runner built for speed across open ground. The animal received the name Ephegia O'Keeffe, honoring artist Georgia O'Keeffe, whose life became closely tied to the landscapes surrounding Ghost Ranch. Her ashes were later scattered across that same region, linking the fossil to someone who had long celebrated its rugged beauty through art. The name became an unexpected meeting point between natural history and human history, each preserving memories of the same remarkable place. Ephigia looked astonishingly similar to the ornithomimid dinosaurs that flourished much later during the Cretaceous period. Those long-legged animals, including Gallimimus and Ornithomimus, are often called ostrich-mimic dinosaurs because of their lightly built bodies and swift-running adaptations. The resemblance between them and Ephigia reached far beyond superficial appearance. Nearly every major feature seemed to echo the same design. Timing, however, transformed that resemblance into one of evolution's most remarkable stories. Ornithomimids would not appear until roughly 100 million years later. Ephigia had already reached almost the same body plan through an entirely separate evolutionary route. Sterling Nesbitt's scientific description, published during 2007, confirmed that Ephigia belonged among the pseudosuchians, the crocodile line archosaurs. Its likeness to later dinosaurs represented an exceptional example of convergent evolution, where unrelated lineages independently arrive at nearly identical solutions. Another relative deepened the mystery even further. Shuvosaurus inexpectedus, discovered in Texas, had first been classified as a dinosaur because its beaked skull seemed so unmistakably bird-like. Even its species name, meaning unexpected, reflected the surprise that followed once researchers realized it belonged within the crocodile lineage instead. Together, these discoveries revealed that the crocodile family tree had produced elegant two-legged runners long before dinosaurs evolved similar forms, leaving behind a remarkable legacy that had remained hidden inside museum collections for generations. Sometimes, an entire family can remain scattered across continents before anyone realizes its members belong together. Fossils collected from deserts stretching between North and South America gradually revealed exactly such a story, connecting several unusual animals into a single lineage whose shared features painted a surprising portrait of crocodile evolution during the late Triassic. Paleontologists now recognize this group as the Shuvosauridae, a family within the crocodile line archosaurs known as pseudosuchians. Although each species possessed its own subtle distinctions, they shared an unmistakable combination of traits. They walked on two legs, balanced on long hind limbs, carried greatly reduced forelimbs, and bore completely toothless beaks. Their skeletons remained lightly built, suggesting agile movement across open landscapes instead of the heavy ambush lifestyle associated with modern crocodilians. At present, four recognized species define this remarkable family. The oldest known member is Shuvosaurus inexpectatus from what is now Texas, an animal first mistaken for a dinosaur because its skull looked so remarkably bird-like. Far to the south, Silosuchus longicervix emerged from rocks in Argentina, demonstrating that these unusual crocodile relatives occupied both northern and southern portions of the ancient supercontinent. Ghost Ranch later contributed Ephigia o'Keefe'i, while another discovery would eventually complete an important missing chapter. That final edition arrived during the year 2025 with the formal description of Labruhasuchus expectatus. The fossil also came from Ghost Ranch and occupied an important place in time, living about 212 million years ago. It bridged a gap separating the older Shuvosaurus from the younger Ephigia, providing paleontologists with another snapshot of how this distinctive body plan persisted across millions of years without dramatic alteration. Its name carries an unexpected connection to local folklore. Long before Ghost Ranch became famous for fossils, stories claimed the region had once been called Rancho de los Brujos, meaning Ranch of the Witches. According to legend, the frightening reputation discouraged strangers from approaching, helping conceal cattle rustling activities. The new species adopted that history through the name Labruhasuchus, meaning the witch's crocodile, tying paleontology to traditions that had echoed across the landscape for generations. The species name Expectatus offered another thoughtful detail. It served as deliberate wordplay alongside Shuvosaurus inexpectatus. One represented the unexpected, while the other became the expected discovery that researchers believed should eventually appear if the fossil record continued filling its own gaps. Finding that intermediate form strengthened confidence that the evolutionary history of this family was gradually becoming clearer with every excavation. Close examination of Labruhasuchus revealed something equally important. Its skeleton differed only slightly from those of its relatives, despite millions of years separating them. Such remarkable stability suggests that the overall body design had already become highly successful, requiring very little structural change across immense spans of time. Lead author Alan Turner summarized the discovery by noting that bipedal movement represented an unusual path for crocodile relatives, although one that had clearly proven effective for these animals. Another surprise emerged from detailed study of their skulls. Functional analyses indicate that these beaked reptiles were probably adapted for eating plants instead of hunting flesh. Their toothless jaws likely cropped vegetation as they moved swiftly through Triassic environments. They reveal a branch of the crocodile lineage, experimenting with herbivory while maintaining upright running abilities, showing once again that crocodile evolution repeatedly explored forms that seem almost unimaginable when viewed beside their living descendants. Growth often changes an animal's size, its strength, or the shape of its skull. Far more rarely, it transforms the very way the body moves across the ground. Hidden among hundreds of fossils from Arizona lay evidence of one of the clearest examples ever found, revealing that a crocodile relative spent its youth walking one way before adopting an entirely different style of movement as it matured. The animal is known as Sonsilasuchus cedrus, formally described during the early months of 2026 from fossils discovered within the Chinle Formation of Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. It lived around 215 million years ago during the late Triassic and belonged to the same remarkable family as Aphidia and Shuvosaurus. Rather than adding another unusual species to an already surprising group, it offered a glimpse into how a single individual changed throughout its lifetime. Standing about 63.5 centimeters tall, which is about 25 inches, or roughly 2 feet, that is nearly 64 centimeters, the animal possessed a toothless beak, a large eye socket, and lightweight hollow bones. Those features closely resembled adaptations later seen in ostrich mimic dinosaurs, despite arising independently within the crocodile lineage. Once again, separate branches of the evolutionary tree arrived at nearly the same destination through different histories. The breakthrough emerged when researchers compared fossils representing different stages of growth instead of examining only fully grown adults. Limb proportions shifted in a pattern that could not be dismissed as random variation. Juvenile individuals possessed forelimbs and hind limbs that remained relatively balanced in length, creating a body well suited for movement on all four limbs. Their posture would have distributed weight evenly while they explored their surroundings during early life. Adult specimens told another story altogether. As the animals matured, the hind limbs became noticeably longer and more robust, while the forelimbs remained comparatively small. The entire center of balance shifted backward, supporting an upright posture carried primarily by the hind legs. The evidence suggested that Sonsilasuchus began life as a quadruped before gradually becoming a biped, an extraordinary transformation preserved across successive stages of growth. Lead researcher Elliot Armour Smith summarized the discovery by explaining that these creatures appeared to begin their lives on four legs before switching to two legs as they grew, describing the pattern as particularly unusual. Paleontologists refer to this phenomenon as an ontogenetic locomotor shift, meaning that an animal changes its primary mode of movement during development. Such transitions remain exceptionally uncommon in the fossil record, making this one of the clearest documented examples known to science. Its species name, Cedrus, honors cedar trees, evergreen conifers resembling those that formed part of the forests surrounding its habitat during the late Triassic. Those woodlands supported thriving ecosystems where these graceful reptiles evidently flourished. Hundreds of Sonsilasuchus fossils have now been recovered from Petrified Forest National Park, indicating that this animal was not an isolated curiosity, but a successful and abundant resident of its environment. Viewed together, these discoveries reveal more than an unusual life history. They show a crocodile relative rewriting its own movement as it matured, carrying two different locomotor strategies within a single lifetime. The flexibility displayed by this lineage continued expanding the boundaries of what crocodile evolution could achieve, leaving an increasingly rich portrait of a family whose diversity reached far beyond any single skeleton. Ideas can endure for generations before a fresh look at familiar evidence reshapes them. For much of modern paleontology, dinosaurs were portrayed as inevitable victors, rising because they possessed qualities their rivals lacked. That story settled comfortably into textbooks and documentaries, carrying the feeling of certainty. Then a careful examination of the fossil record revealed that the late Triassic world had been telling a more complicated tale all along. During 2008, Steve Brusatte, now at the University of Edinburgh, and Michael Benton of the University of Bristol published a landmark study in the journal Science. Their goal reached beyond describing another prehistoric animal. They wanted to test one of the biggest assumptions in vertebrate evolution. Had dinosaurs truly risen because they were biologically superior, or had history followed a less predictable course? Their investigation drew upon skeletal information from 64 different taxa representing both the dinosaur lineage and the crocodile line, then commonly known as the crurotarsans. Rather than focusing on famous skeletons alone, they compared diversity, abundance, evolutionary rates, and ecological variety across the late Triassic. The resulting picture depended on patterns gathered from many fossils instead of isolated discoveries. The first conclusion challenged long accepted expectations. Crocodile line archosaurs were more abundant than dinosaurs in many late Triassic ecosystems. Their remains appeared more frequently, suggesting larger populations occupying those landscapes. A traveler crossing those environments around 210 million years ago would likely have encountered crocodile relatives more often than dinosaurs. They were familiar inhabitants instead of fading holdovers awaiting replacement. The second finding reached even further. Crocodile relatives were represented by a greater number of species than their dinosaur counterparts. Diversity spread across numerous branches, reflecting successful adaptation to different environments and lifestyles. Their evolutionary experiment had already produced an impressive range of forms, while dinosaurs still occupied a comparatively modest portion of the available ecological space. Equally striking was the pace of change. The researchers found that crocodile relatives evolved at approximately the same rate as dinosaurs. If one lineage possessed overwhelming evolutionary advantages, a noticeably faster rate of anatomical innovation might have been expected. The evidence showed no such pattern. Both groups continued exploring new possibilities with comparable momentum, each responding to the shifting world around them. Their final observation highlighted the extraordinary breadth of the crocodile lineage. These animals occupied a wider collection of body plans and ecological roles than dinosaurs during the late Triassic. Some walked on two legs, while others moved on four. Certain species developed heavy armor, others embraced life beside rivers and lakes. Some browsed on vegetation with toothless beaks, while others became formidable flesh-eating predators. Earlier discoveries within this narrative now fit naturally into that broader framework, each representing one branch of a flourishing family instead of isolated exceptions. Steve Brusatte later summarized the implications with memorable honesty. He observed that if someone had stood in the late Triassic around 210 million years ago and placed a wager on which lineage would dominate the future, crocodile relatives would have seemed the safest choice. The study overturned the familiar image of dinosaurs winning through clear evolutionary superiority. The word Brusatte chose to explain what followed carried remarkable restraint. Luck became the simplest description for one of the greatest turning points in the history of life. A family tree can sometimes resemble an entire civilization. Branch after branch spread across the late Triassic landscape, each exploring a different way of living, until the crocodile lineage occupied almost every major role available on land. Looking across that world reveals a panorama filled with creatures that shared common ancestry while appearing astonishingly different from one another. Among the most distinctive were the aetosaurs, armored plant eaters whose bodies were wrapped in rows of interlocking bony plates called osteoderms. Those natural shields covered the neck, back, sides, and tail, creating living fortresses that wandered through Triassic vegetation. One famous member, Desmatosuchus, carried immense shoulder spikes projecting outward like paired spears, adding another layer of defense to an already formidable appearance. Another, Typothorax, became common across what is now the southwestern region of the United States, leaving beautifully preserved skeletons that display armor stretching across almost the entire back. Some atosaurs reached between 3 and 5 meters in length, which is about 10 to 16 feet, filling the position later occupied by armored dinosaur herbivores many millions of years afterward. They browsed on low vegetation, shaping their environments while carrying protection that few predators would have welcomed challenging. Their presence demonstrates that the crocodile lineage had already mastered the art of building heavily defended herbivores long before similar designs appeared elsewhere. Waterways supported another remarkable branch. Phytosaurs bore such an extraordinary resemblance to modern crocodiles that early discoveries confused generations of researchers. Their bodies were broad, their jaws elongated, and their eyes rested high upon the skull, allowing much of the head to remain above the water while the rest stayed concealed beneath the surface. Powerful tails propelled them through rivers and lakes with impressive control. One anatomical detail revealed their true identity. Modern crocodiles breathe through nostrils positioned near the tip of the snout, whereas phytosaur nostrils sat much farther back, close to the eyes. That subtle difference reflected a separate evolutionary history, despite their striking similarity. Some species grew to immense size. Redondosaurus possessed a skull exceeding 1 meter in length, that is nearly 3 feet, making it one of the largest ambush hunters of its time. The familiar riverside strategy associated with crocodiles today had already been perfected by these distant relatives. Movement across dry ground displayed equal diversity. Ornithosuchids combined agility with flexibility, shifting between walking on 4 limbs and moving on 2 whenever speed or balance favored a different posture. Their bodies reveal an evolutionary willingness to experiment instead of settling upon a single solution. Earlier still, the erythrosuchids emerged as imposing hunters whose heads could account for nearly 1/4 of total body length. These predators appeared before any dinosaur had entered the scene, establishing large carnivorous archosaurs as dominant figures within recovering ecosystems. Seen together, these animals transform the crocodile lineage into something far greater than a collection of unusual species. Towering predators, armored grazers, river ambush specialists, swift runners, and beaked plant eaters all belong to the same broader family. Their success unfolded across forests, floodplains, lake shores, and open landscapes with extraordinary adaptability. Each branch explored a different answer to survival, creating an evolutionary empire whose reach extended into nearly every ecological corner the Triassic world could offer. Great evolutionary stories sometimes turn upon structures so small they disappear beneath skin and muscle. Deep inside the hind limb of every crocodile relative rested a mechanical design that shaped millions of years of possibility. While teeth, claws, and armor captured attention, the true foundation of the crocodile empire lay where the leg met the foot, inside an ankle built for extraordinary flexibility. The defining feature of the crocodile lineage was the crurotarsal ankle. This joint connected two major bones positioned between the shin and the foot. One bone, called the astragalus, formed the upper part of the joint and linked closely with the lower leg. Beside it rested the calcaneum, the larger rear bone that supported the heel. Together they created a rotating connection, unlike the simpler arrangement found in the dinosaur lineage. That rotation allowed movement in several directions instead of only one. The foot could swing forward and backward, while also twisting from side to side with impressive freedom. Such mobility gave these reptiles an unusual collection of options. A single animal could flatten its body close to the ground while creeping through vegetation, raise itself into an elevated walk for efficient travel, or adopt a more upright stance whenever speed became useful. Few vertebrate groups possessed such a broad range of movement within the same skeletal framework. Modern crocodilians still preserve this remarkable inheritance. Although they are best known for gliding through water or resting along riverbanks, they remain capable of lifting the body clear of the ground in what researchers call the high walk. During this posture, the legs extend beneath the body, producing a confident stride that feels surprisingly unlike the sprawling crawl most people associate with crocodiles. That movement is not an entirely new behavior. It represents an enduring echo of anatomical capabilities established far earlier in their evolutionary history. Dinosaurs followed another path. Their lineage developed the mesotarsal ankle, a design functioning much like a door hinge. The joint moved primarily in a single direction, producing excellent stability during sustained running and upright locomotion. This simpler arrangement reduced unnecessary motion and transferred force efficiently through the leg with each stride. It became a superb foundation for dedicated bipedal movement across long distances. Every advantage arrived with a corresponding limitation. The dinosaur ankle favored efficiency, although it offered fewer postural choices. The crocodile ankle supported versatility, allowing bodies to explore an astonishing variety of lifestyles. Within that flexible design emerged sprawling hunters, erect walkers, swift bipeds, semi-aquatic ambush specialists, and many forms that blended characteristics in unexpected combinations. One shared anatomical feature: open doors to experiments that unfolded across millions of years. Support for this remarkable versatility continues to emerge from living animals. A study published during 2023 examined ankle mechanics in modern alligators and demonstrated that the crurotarsal structure permits three-dimensional rotation, unavailable in the mesotarsal arrangement. Living crocodilians therefore preserve direct evidence of a mechanical system capable of movements extending well beyond ordinary walking. Looking backward through the Triassic, that single joint becomes far more than a skeletal curiosity. It served as the hidden engine powering an empire of diverse forms, each exploring different solutions to survival while drawing upon the same adaptable foundation. Bones no larger than a human hand quietly guided one of evolution's most ambitious experiments, proving that an empire can rest upon the smallest architecture of all. Imagine wandering across a late Triassic floodplain with no knowledge of the future. Nothing before your eyes would hint that dinosaurs were destined to rule the next chapter of life on land. They were present, certainly, though they occupied the edges of a world whose dominant inhabitants belonged to another branch of the Archosaur family tree. For roughly 30 million years, dinosaurs remained participants rather than rulers. Their earliest representatives reflected that modest beginning, Creatures such as Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, and Coelophysis were generally small, measuring between 1 and 3 kilometers, which is about zero point 0.6 to 1.9 miles in total body length. They possessed swift limbs and capable jaws, yet they rarely stood at the summit of their ecosystems. Their bodies suited active hunting, although their opportunities unfolded beneath the shadow of larger crocodile-lion predators already commanding the landscape. Fossil discoveries reinforce that picture with striking consistency. In many late Triassic rock formations where dinosaurs and crocodile-lion archosaurs appear together, dinosaur remains represent only a minority of the preserved animals. The balance of abundance favors the crurotarsans. Their bones appear more frequently, their diversity spreads across more ecological roles, and their presence suggests populations flourishing across broad regions. Dinosaurs existed alongside them without replacing them. Whenever towering Rawasuchians or large crocodile relatives occupied an ecosystem, no known Triassic dinosaur assumed the role of apex predator. That highest position belonged elsewhere. Smaller dinosaurs hunted, scavenged, and competed within the food web, although the greatest carnivores came from the crocodile branch. The pattern repeated often enough that it forms one of the clearest themes emerging from the fossil record of this period. Another line of evidence comes from studies comparing limb anatomy across these competing groups. Researchers found that members of the dinosaur branch gradually developed increasing variation in limb proportions through time, hinting at expanding possibilities for movement. The crocodile lineage displayed a different story. During the Triassic itself, those animals already expressed remarkable flexibility through the body plans explored across their many forms. They achieved impressive ecological variety without continually reinventing the underlying structure of their limbs. As millions of years passed, the trend shifted. Locomotor diversity within the crocodile branch gradually declined, while diversity among dinosaurs continued to expand. The timing carries profound importance. That widening dinosaur advantage became obvious only after many crocodile-lion competitors had disappeared. The changing pattern followed ecological upheaval instead of preceding it, suggesting that new opportunities opened after established rivals had vanished. This distinction reshapes one of the most familiar stories in paleontology. Dinosaurs did not steadily climb toward dominance by overwhelming inferior competitors. Their ascent depended upon circumstances unfolding beyond ordinary evolutionary rivalry. Paleontologist Steve Bruzat has described dinosaurs as the beneficiaries of two mass extinction events, emphasizing that fortune played a decisive role alongside adaptation. The earlier extinction occurred around 228 million years ago during the middle portion of the Triassic. Scientists continue investigating its exact causes, and both major archosaur branches survived the disruption. Life recovered, ecosystems stabilized once more, and the long coexistence between dinosaur relatives and crocodile relatives continued across the supercontinent. Everything changed during the end of the Triassic, around 201 million years ago. That catastrophe transformed the balance of life on land, ending an age in which dinosaurs had long occupied supporting roles, while another empire held the greater share of the stage. Across the whole span of the Triassic period, the continents formed a single connected world. Every major landmass belonged to one immense supercontinent called Pangaea, stretching from one polar region toward the other. Animals could spread across extraordinary distances without encountering an ocean broad enough to halt their journey. Forests, deserts, floodplains, and river systems blended into one connected landscape where evolutionary experiments unfolded across nearly the entire face of the planet. That unity did not last. Around 201 million years ago, forces deep within the Earth began pulling the crust apart. The tectonic plates carrying the land that would later become North America drifted away from those carrying future Africa. At first, the separation appeared as long fractures cutting through the continent. Those widening scars reached far into the crust, opening pathways for molten rock rising from the mantle below. The result became one of the greatest volcanic episodes ever recorded in Earth's history, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. This immense volcanic province eventually spread across roughly 10 million square kilometers, which is about 3,861,000 square miles. Its total extent exceeded the modern area of Canada, surpassed the United States, and stretched beyond the present boundaries of China. Few geological events approached its scale. These eruptions unfolded in repeated pulses, rather than one continuous outpouring. Across roughly 1 million years, immense volumes of lava spilled across the surface, while other streams of magma forced their way sideways through layers of buried sedimentary rock. Those underground intrusions transformed everything they touched. Rocks rich in carbon gradually released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, while other chemical reactions liberated methane and additional greenhouse gases. The atmosphere absorbed wave after wave of volcanic emissions with little opportunity for recovery between episodes. Recent research published during 2024 compared the earliest eruptive pulses with the famous Lakey eruption in Iceland during 1783. The historical eruption disrupted weather patterns, damaged harvests, and contributed to severe hardship across Europe. Even so, the earliest phases of the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province exceeded that event by hundreds of times, revealing an almost unimaginable difference in volcanic output and atmospheric disruption. The fractures widening across Pangaea marked the first chapter in the creation of a future ocean. Water would eventually flood the expanding gap, producing the Atlantic Ocean known today. During those earlier stages, however, the landscape remained dominated by volcanic plains, cracked valleys, and expanding rift systems. Fresh lava covered older ground, while rising magma altered buried rocks across enormous distances. Every pulse reshaped the continent before another arrived. Each eruption added more carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other volcanic gases to the atmosphere. Earth's natural systems ordinarily balanced such changes through weathering, plant growth, and ocean chemistry. Those processes unfolded across long stretches of time. The repeated volcanic pulses delivered greenhouse gases far faster than those buffering systems could absorb them. Atmospheric chemistry shifted beyond the pace at which forests, rivers, soils, and oceans could restore equilibrium. The continent itself was becoming something entirely new, although the transformation demanded an immense biological cost. Before the Atlantic Ocean existed, the widening rift became a landscape defined by relentless volcanic activity, where each fresh pulse carried consequences spreading far beyond the glowing rock from which it emerged. The record preserved in stone narrows with startling speed. Layer after layer still carries traces of flourishing rivers, broad forests, towering reptiles, and communities refined across millions of years. Then the pattern changes. Familiar forms disappear together, leaving a geological boundary that marks one of the 5 greatest biological crises in the history of Earth: the end of the Triassic extinction around 201 million years ago. Across the planet, roughly 76% of all species vanished. The oceans lost many of their oldest inhabitants. Ammonites, whose coiled shells had drifted through countless generations, suffered catastrophic losses. Reef-building corals approached collapse, leaving marine ecosystems stripped of their architects. Conodonts, small eel-like animals represented today only by their tiny feeding elements, reached the end of their entire evolutionary history. They disappeared completely, leaving no descendants to carry their lineage beyond that boundary. Scientists increasingly agree that the immense volcanic activity associated with the Central Atlantic magmatic province drove this catastrophe, although the sequence of events continues to be refined. Massive releases of carbon dioxide sustained powerful greenhouse warming over long intervals. Research published during 2024 suggests the opening blow may have arrived in another form. Enormous quantities of sulfur-rich aerosols thrown into the atmosphere likely reflected sunlight away from Earth, producing abrupt cooling before prolonged warming reshaped the climate. A world already under strain experienced rapid environmental swings that few organisms could endure. Chemical evidence supports this picture. Rocks deposited during the crisis preserve a pronounced negative carbon isotope excursion lasting between 20,000 and 40,000 years. That signal records a profound disturbance to the global carbon cycle. Even after the most destructive interval had passed, planetary systems required millions of years before a new balance gradually emerged. Recovery unfolded across spans of time that exceeded the existence of countless individual species. Life on land experienced losses with remarkable selectivity. The great crocodile lineage, which had filled nearly every major ecological role through much of the Triassic, suffered devastating collapse. Rauisuchians disappeared completely, ending the reign of formidable terrestrial predators that had dominated for roughly 30 million years. Adosaurs vanished beside them, carrying away their armored bodies and successful grazing lifestyle. Phytosaurs, masters of rivers and lakes, also reached their conclusion. Shuvasaurids, with their beaks and upright stride, ended their own distinctive experiment. Ornithosuchids likewise faded from the record until no living branch remained. Sedimentary rocks lying immediately below the earliest lava flows preserve the richness of the earlier world. Large crocodile relatives crossed floodplains beside broad-headed amphibians. Tree-dwelling reptiles moved through woodland canopies while lush vegetation spread across the landscape. Above those same horizons, diversity contracts with startling clarity. Entire groups that once appeared dependable through millions of years no longer return. The absence itself becomes part of the fossil record. This transformation reshaped the living world more completely than any gradual competition could accomplish. The crocodile dynasty had assembled predators, grazers, swift runners, armored browsers, and aquatic hunters from one versatile evolutionary foundation. Within a comparatively brief geological interval, that flourishing network unraveled. The land emerged, carrying many familiar rivers and valleys, yet populated by a profoundly different collection of survivors, each continuing a story that chance had allowed to remain unfinished. Survival did not belong to the largest bodies or the rulers that had shaped entire ecosystems. When the dust of the end-Triassic extinction settled, and the great crocodile dynasty had been reduced almost beyond recognition, a single branch remained. It belonged to the crocodilomorpha, and within that lineage the survivors were the smallest, most adaptable members, animals known as the Sphenosuchians and their close relatives. Compared with the imposing forms that had disappeared, these creatures appeared almost modest. Many measured only about 1 meter in length, which is about 3.3 miles. Their bodies were narrow, their limbs long, and their skeletons lightly built for swift movement across open ground. Their heads lacked the massive proportions of the earlier crocodile relatives, and their overall appearance resembled agile running lizards far more than the broad snouted crocodilians familiar today. Looking at them, almost nothing hinted that they alone carried the future of one of Earth's oldest reptile lineages. Their success may have rested on a quality that often escapes attention. Size shapes nearly every aspect of survival. A smaller animal requires less food to sustain itself during periods when vegetation withers and prey becomes scarce. It can exploit narrow shelters beyond the reach of larger competitors and escape weather extremes by retreating into burrows or protected crevices. Each advantage appears modest in isolation, yet together they become powerful during an environmental crisis that stretches across generations. Reproduction may also have favored these survivors. Smaller vertebrates generally mature more rapidly and produce new generations over shorter intervals. If populations suffer severe losses, recovery can begin while larger animals are still struggling to replace a handful of individuals. Evolution gains opportunities whenever generations pass more quickly, allowing natural selection to act repeatedly as changing conditions reshape the landscape. A similar pattern appears across several groups that cross the same extinction boundary. The dinosaurs that endured were likewise modest in size, with many possessing feathers, burrowing habits, or other characteristics that improved resilience during unstable times. Early mammals survived. Early true lizards survived. Turtles survived. None represented the towering giants that had dominated earlier communities. The future repeatedly favored flexibility over grandeur. The transformation carried a striking irony. For roughly 30 million years, crocodile line archosaurs had occupied nearly every major role across the land. Their relatives had become apex hunters, armored plant eaters, swift runners, river ambush specialists, and upright beaked foragers. That extraordinary diversity narrowed until only a few small descendants remained. The immense dynasty left behind a genetic remnant, preserving possibilities that no observer standing within the Triassic could reasonably have predicted. Researchers who examined this transition compared those surviving crocodile ancestors to modern foxes and jackals. The comparison reflects body form rather than close relationship. Their sleek frames, long limbs, and active lifestyle contrasted sharply with the image most people associate with crocodilians. They became travelers through a world suddenly emptied of many former rivals, carrying inherited traits that would later support another remarkable evolutionary transformation. Nothing about these survivors suggested the return of a great dynasty. Their strength rested in endurance instead of dominance. From those compact runners, moving through forests and floodplains that had been forever altered, the crocodile lineage continued its long journey, preserving a story that had narrowed to its smallest possible beginning. Morning returned to a world that no longer resembled the one carried through the closing chapters of the Triassic. Forests spread across familiar ground, rivers continued their winding courses, and seasons still circled the planet, yet countless ecological roles now stood vacant. The disappearance of so many crocodile line archosaurs left opportunities that had remained occupied for roughly 30 million years. Those empty places did not remain vacant for long. The surviving dinosaurs entered the early Jurassic at a moment unlike any before it. Competition from the dominant Rawasuchian predators had ended, opening pathways that had previously remained closed. Theropods, once modest hunters sharing landscapes with larger crocodile relatives, expanded into predator roles across a widening range of habitats. Freed from former constraints, they increased in size and diversified into lineages that would eventually include many of the most recognizable carnivores in Earth's history. Plant eaters experienced a similar transformation. Early sauropodomorphs, already present before the extinction, spread rapidly through environments where large browsing competitors had disappeared. Their bodies grew larger across successive generations, allowing them to exploit vegetation on a scale rarely seen before. At the same time, the Ornithischian lineage began its own quiet expansion. From those early members would eventually emerge armored dinosaurs, horned dinosaurs, and duck-billed dinosaurs, each developing distinctive solutions to the challenges of herbivorous life. The reshaping of ecosystems unfolded with remarkable consistency. Positions once held by crocodile relatives became occupied again, although by different inhabitants. Apex terrestrial hunters gave way to increasingly formidable theropods. The ecological space, once dominated by armored etiosaurs, was later filled by stegosaurs and ankylosaurs, each carrying defensive armor fashioned through separate evolutionary histories. Upright beaked foragers eventually found counterparts among the ornithomimids, whose resemblance to earlier shuvosaurids arose through convergent evolution instead of shared ancestry. Even the role of semi-aquatic ambush hunter would one day return to descendants of the surviving crocodilomorphs themselves. This pattern illustrates a broader principle of evolution. Ecological opportunities rarely remain empty for extended intervals. When one successful lineage disappears, another may gradually evolve characteristics suited to the same environment. The replacement often creates the impression of continuity, although the underlying ancestry tells a very different story. Nature repeatedly fills familiar spaces using entirely new evolutionary experiments. As paleontologist Steve Brusate has observed, the dinosaurs became the beneficiaries of this catastrophe. The distinction carries considerable importance. Their rise did not result from steadily defeating every rival through superior adaptation. Instead, a global extinction removed many established competitors before dinosaurs expanded into newly available ecosystems. Chance altered the playing field, and evolution responded to those altered conditions. One of paleontology's deepest ironies emerges from this sequence of events. The Age of Dinosaurs, celebrated as the defining era of giant terrestrial reptiles, unfolded because the flourishing age of crocodile relatives ended so abruptly. Had the volcanic catastrophe not transformed the planet, the familiar image of prehistoric life might have followed a profoundly different path. Even so, the surviving crocodilomorphs had not reached the end of their own journey. Their reduced numbers concealed remarkable evolutionary potential. While dinosaurs spread across the emptied world, those small descendants continued changing in quieter ways, preparing for another remarkable transformation that would carry their lineage into entirely new realms of life. Survival rarely preserves the past unchanged. More often, it creates room for forms that once seemed impossible. The crocodilomorphs that crossed the end of the Triassic carried only a fraction of their former dynasty into the Jurassic, yet within those modest survivors rested an extraordinary capacity for change. Their descendants would spend the next 130 million years exploring evolutionary pathways with remarkable freedom, producing creatures that scarcely resembled the crocodilians familiar today. Across the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, the crocodilomorph family expanded into habitats stretching from inland forests to the open sea. Some lineages abandoned the land altogether. Their limbs transformed into flippers, their tails developed powerful fish-like profiles, and their streamlined bodies carried them through marine environments where they hunted cephalopods, fish, and other swift prey. Their appearance recalled dolphins or marine reptiles, far more than modern crocodiles, demonstrating how thoroughly natural selection could reshape an inherited body plan. Other branches moved in the opposite direction, becoming agile runners adapted for life on dry ground. Long legs lifted their bodies well above the soil, while lighter skeletons supported efficient movement across open landscapes. These animals pursued prey with speed instead of relying upon surprise at the water's edge. Their proportions have often been compared with those of foxes or small hunting dogs, although their ancestry remained firmly rooted within the crocodile lineage. Diet also diversified in remarkable ways. Certain crocodilomorphs evolved broad bodies protected by sturdy armor, browsing on vegetation much as entirely unrelated herbivores did elsewhere. Others developed shortened faces with rounded skulls and unusually complex teeth suited for chewing plants. Some possessed teeth resembling those of mammals, capable of processing food with a level of specialization unexpected in reptiles. Their appearance departed so completely from the familiar crocodilian profile that an observer seeing only the skull might never suspect their true relationships. Predatory forms continued evolving as well. Deep-skulled terrestrial hunters emerged, carrying powerful jaws capable of subduing substantial prey far from rivers or lakes. Along the margins of freshwater habitats, gigantic crocodilomorphs eventually appeared, with some exceeding 10 meters in length, which is about 33 feet. These immense hunters occupied the role of dominant shoreline predators, demonstrating that the lineage had recovered not merely in numbers, but also in ecological influence. Throughout this immense span of time, the familiar semi-aquatic ambush hunter represented only one possibility among many. The group known as the Neo-Suchians appeared during the Jurassic, giving rise to the lineage that would ultimately produce modern crocodilians. For more than 100 million years, however, they remained only a single branch within an expansive evolutionary tree crowded with experiments in anatomy, diet, movement, and habitat. The body form recognized today eventually endured, although it existed beside many alternatives that later vanished. Viewed across the sweep of geological history, this transformation carries an unexpected elegance. A lineage, reduced almost to extinction, refused to remain confined by its losses. From a handful of small survivors emerged marine specialists, fleet terrestrial hunters, armored plant eaters, giant shoreline predators, and many forms that defy familiar categories. Their first empire had ended beneath planetary upheaval. Their second arose through invention, proving that survival sometimes opens more evolutionary doors than uninterrupted success ever could. Far beyond the shoreline, where waves erased every trace of footprints, another transformation unfolded. The descendants of the small crocodilomorph survivors reached waters that stretched past river mouths and coastal marshes into the open sea. There, during the early Jurassic, a remarkable lineage known as the Thalattosuchians began reshaping nearly every part of its body for a life carried entirely by salt water. Their history divided into two broad branches. The teleosauroids remained closely tied to coastlines, estuaries, and shallow marine habitats. Their bodies still resembled familiar crocodilians in many respects, although they were already highly capable swimmers. Some reached nearly 10 kilometers, which is about 6.2 miles, in length. They patrolled tidal channels and sheltered bays, waiting for fish and other marine animals with techniques refined over countless generations. Even with these adaptations, they retained limbs that allowed movement across land when necessary. Another branch traveled much farther from shore. The metriorhynchoids gradually abandoned the compromises required by an amphibious existence, becoming the most completely marine archosaurs ever known. Their forelimbs changed into broad flippers that no longer supported walking. Their bodies narrowed into smooth, torpedo shaped forms that reduced resistance as they crossed the water. Heavy armor disappeared entirely, exchanged for streamlined skin that favored speed and endurance over protection. The tail also underwent a profound redesign. A vertical fin developed, with the lower portion extending farther than the upper, creating what paleontologists describe as a hypocircle tail. Each sweep generated powerful forward motion, much like the tails of fast swimming sharks, although this resemblance emerged independently through convergent evolution. The result was an animal built for sustained travel across open oceans, where efficient movement mattered more than sudden bursts of acceleration. Living in seawater demanded another innovation. Marine environments constantly draw water out of an animal's tissues through osmosis, creating a continual challenge for maintaining internal balance. Metriorhynchids evolved specialized salt-secreting glands that removed excess salt from their bodies, allowing them to spend their lives surrounded by seawater without returning to freshwater sources. This adaptation joined the flippers' streamlined body and specialized tail in completing an extraordinary departure from their terrestrial ancestry. Evidence suggests these oceanic hunters became so specialized that returning to land was no longer practical. Their transformed limbs could no longer bear their weight across beaches or rocky shores. They belonged to the open sea as completely as whales do today, representing the only archosaurs known to have achieved a fully pelagic existence. Among them, Dacosaurus andiniensis carried an especially massive skull armed with robust teeth suited for attacking large marine reptiles. Researchers informally nicknamed it Godzilla, reflecting the immense force packed within its jaws. The teleosauroids continued flourishing closer to land, while the metriorhynchids mastered distant waters. Together, they occupied marine ecosystems throughout the Jurassic and into the early Cretaceous, filling ecological roles that few would associate with crocodile relatives. Eventually, these lineages disappeared, leaving no living descendants to carry their forms into the present. Their disappearance erased an entire ocean chapter from crocodile history, preserving it only in stone, where streamlined skeletons still reveal that one branch of the crocodile family once crossed the seas as permanent citizens of the open water. Across the southern continents, the crocodile lineage continued writing stories that seemed determined to overturn every familiar expectation. During the Cretaceous period, from about 145 million years ago until 66 million years ago, a remarkable collection of crocodilomorphs, known as the Notosuchians, flourished across landscapes that are now part of South America, Africa, Madagascar, and Asia. They did not settle into a single successful design. Instead, they explored one possibility after another, producing bodies that appeared borrowed from entirely different branches of life. Among the most surprising was Simosuchus clarkii, discovered in Madagascar. Its skull ended in a short, rounded snout, unlike the long jaws associated with living crocodilians. Broad teeth and wear patterns revealed a diet centered on plants, making it one of the clearest examples of a confirmed herbivorous crocodilomorph. Thick, bony plates covered much of its body, creating protective armor that recalled an armadillo more than a crocodile. Its compact frame, blunt face, and sturdy build formed a combination that would have seemed almost impossible without the fossil evidence resting before paleontologists. Another unexpected branch appeared in Eastern Asia. Chimaerosuchus paradoxus possessed broad, complex teeth, with several raised points on each crown, well suited for grinding vegetation before swallowing it. Such teeth are common among plant-eating mammals, but extremely unusual within crocodile relatives. The animal received a name meaning paradoxical chimera crocodile because its anatomy blended features that seemed drawn from unrelated groups. Every newly prepared fossil reinforced the same lesson that crocodilomorph evolution repeatedly crossed boundaries that earlier scientists assumed were fixed. Elsewhere, smaller hunters followed an entirely different path. Arari pesicus lived across parts of Africa and South America with long legs, a light skeleton, and proportions suited for rapid movement across dry ground. Researchers sometimes refer to these animals as dog crocodiles because their posture and running ability resemble those of agile terrestrial mammals far more than modern crocodilians. They searched for food on land with speed and flexibility, pursuing prey through habitats where a sprawling ambush hunter would have struggled to compete. Patagonia added another remarkable chapter through Notosuchus terrestris. Its teeth displayed mammal-like complexity, suggesting an ability to process a varied diet instead of relying only on slicing flesh. The shape of its skull and body indicates an active terrestrial forager that probably rooted through soil, leaf litter, and low vegetation in search of edible material. Comparisons with modern wild boars arise from this behavior, although the resemblance emerged through convergent evolution rather than close relationship. Taken together, these animals transformed the southern hemisphere into a living workshop of evolutionary experimentation. Armored herbivores, fleet runners, unusual plant eaters, and ground foragers all emerged from a lineage whose modern representatives appear outwardly conservative by comparison. Their diversity demonstrates that the familiar semi-aquatic ambush hunter is only one expression of crocodile evolution. It reflects a successful direction chosen over time, not a limitation carried from the beginning. The fossil record preserves these forgotten designs with remarkable clarity, revealing a family tree whose branches once spread into forms as varied as dogs, armadillos, boars, and creatures unlike anything alive today. Along broad rivers, floodplains, and winding coastal channels, another chapter of crocodile evolution reached extraordinary scale. While many Notosuchians continued exploring life on land in countless forms, the Neosuchian branch produced predators whose size rivaled the largest hunters of their age. They no longer ruled forests or open plains, as their distant Triassic ancestors once had. Yet they became unmatched masters of the shifting boundary where water met solid ground. One of the greatest among them was Sarcosuchus imperator, which lived in Africa during the early Cretaceous, about 112 million years ago. Estimates suggest a total length between 11 kilometers, which is about 6.8 miles, and 12 meters, which is about 39 feet. Its immense body may have weighed as much as 8 tons. A long, powerful snout ended in a rounded swelling called a bulla, a feature whose exact purpose remains uncertain. Some researchers have suggested it may have played a role in producing sounds, recognizing members of its own species, or displaying maturity. Whatever its function, it gave the enormous skull an unmistakable profile, unlike that of any living crocodilian. Its jaws carried an impressive array of conical teeth suited for gripping struggling prey. Fossil evidence indicates that fish formed an important part of its diet, although animals approaching this size could almost certainly overpower many creatures drawn too close to the water. Every approach to the shoreline carried a different balance of risk, because the surface concealed a hunter whose body blended almost perfectly with the rivers it occupied. Far away in North America, another giant emerged during the late Cretaceous, between about 82 million and 73 million years ago. Deinosuchus reached comparable dimensions, with estimated lengths of 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, to 12 meters, which is about 39 feet. Unlike Sarcosuchus, its feeding habits are preserved through direct traces left behind on fossil bones. Hadrosaurs and sea turtles bear deep bite marks, matching the shape and spacing of its teeth, demonstrating that enormous reptiles and dinosaurs alike sometimes became prey at the edge of lakes and rivers. Studies estimating the force generated by its jaws place Deinosuchus among the most powerful biters known in the history of vertebrate life. Thick bone that resisted many other predators could splinter under such pressure. The weighting strategy, perfected by crocodile relatives over millions of years, gained tremendous effectiveness when combined with a body of this scale and strength. Even the largest predatory dinosaurs rarely specialized in hunting across the border between land and water in this manner. That narrow ecological frontier belonged largely to giant crocodilomorphs. They remained concealed within rivers, marshes, and estuaries, controlling a realm where drinking, crossing, or feeding carried unusual danger. The modern saltwater crocodile reaches about 7 meters, which is about 23 feet, in exceptional individuals and may weigh more than 1 ton. It stands among the most formidable living predators, yet its greatest representatives are only about half the length of Sarcosuchus. The old crocodile lineage had surrendered one empire long before, then fashioned another beside the water, where immense jaws and patient endurance shaped an enduring kingdom of their own. Across 250 million years of crocodile evolution, one rhythm returns with remarkable consistency. Flourishing branches spread into landscapes, rivers, coastlines, and oceans, producing forms that scarcely resemble one another. Then a global catastrophe arrives, and almost every experiment disappears. The fossil record preserves this sequence with striking clarity, as though the lineage repeatedly built towering structures of diversity before watching them collapse into a handful of survivors. About 66 million years ago, another planetary crisis unfolded when the Chicxulub asteroid struck the Earth. The impact ended the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs, transforming ecosystems across land and sea. Crocodilomorphs also suffered enormous losses. Their second great flourishing, assembled over more than 100 million years, fractured almost as completely as the first. The fully marine meteorrhynchids had already vanished before the asteroid arrived, leaving the open oceans without their most specialized crocodile relatives. Across the southern hemisphere, the extraordinary Notasuchians also faded from the world. Their herbivores, swift runners, burrowing foragers, and countless unusual forms disappeared. Only the Sebasids continued into the Cenozoic era within parts of South America, carrying a small fragment of that remarkable heritage beyond the extinction boundary. The immense Neosuchian predators also came to an end. Giants such as Deinosuchus no longer waited beside rivers for passing dinosaurs, and many smaller branches vanished alongside them. Entire anatomical experiments that had persisted for tens of millions of years ended within a comparatively brief interval. Layers of rock reveal abundant diversity below the extinction horizon, followed by a dramatically reduced collection above it, echoing a transformation that had already unfolded once before during the closing chapter of the Triassic. Those that endured belonged mainly to semi-aquatic, freshwater lineages. These animals possessed broad diets, flexible habits, and bodies suited to rivers, lakes, marshes, and wetlands that recovered more readily after ecological collapse. From this surviving branch eventually came every living crocodilian. The descendants familiar today represent only one narrow thread woven from an evolutionary tapestry that had once displayed far greater variety. Viewed from a greater distance, the pattern becomes difficult to overlook. At the end of the Triassic, Rauisuchians, Etosaurs, Phytosaurs, Shuvosaurids, and many other crocodile relatives disappeared, while small generalized Phoenosuchian relatives remained. At the end of the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, marine specialists, giant predators, and most land-dwelling branches vanished, while adaptable freshwater forms continued. Each catastrophe favored flexibility over specialization, preserving modest survivors while eliminating many spectacular successes. Recovery followed both crises, though the rebuilding never recreated the full breadth that had existed before. New branches appeared, fresh ecological roles emerged, and crocodile relatives continued evolving, yet the second world remained narrower than the first. Modern crocodilians, therefore, carry the legacy of repeated survival instead of repeated dominance. Behind every broad snout and armored back stands the memory of lineages that once ran across deserts, grazed on vegetation, crossed open oceans, or towered over riverbanks before yielding their place to another age. Sometimes an entire chapter of evolution is rewritten by footprints instead of bones. A skeleton reveals the shape of an animal after death, while tracks preserve a passing moment during life. One sequence records anatomy, the other records behavior. On the southern coast of what is now South Korea, layers of stone preserved such moments with remarkable fidelity, holding impressions left across the muddy edges of lakes about 110 million years ago. During the early Cretaceous, this landscape was dotted with broad freshwater basins bordered by soft sediment. Frogs crossed the shallows, lizards darted between patches of vegetation. Turtles entered and left the water. Dinosaurs wandered along the shore, each step pressed into damp ground before new layers of sediment sealed the surface. Over immense spans of time, those fragile impressions hardened into rock, preserving a crowded record of daily movement. Among these traces lay a collection unlike any previously recognized. In 2020, paleontologist Martin Lockley and colleagues published a detailed study describing unusual trackways from the Sashan Jahye-ri site within the Jinju Formation. The tracks displayed only hind footprints. Across dozens of impressions, no front footprints appeared at all. Lockley summarized the evidence with unusual confidence, explaining that they had dozens of examples and not one sign of a front footprint. The arrangement of the tracks added another surprise. Each footprint landed almost directly ahead of the previous one, producing a narrow path resembling the progress of a tightrope walker. Such a pattern reflects a stable bipedal gait. The animal had advanced on two legs alone, leaving no indication that the forelimbs touched the ground during normal movement across the mud. At first glance, many researchers assumed these traces belonged to flying reptiles. Earlier work by the same research group had proposed a pterosaur origin. The continued study steadily weakened that explanation. Pterosaurs are now understood by nearly all specialists to have walked on all four limbs whenever they moved across land. Their footprints consistently record 4 feet and hind feet together. The Jinju tracks lacked that defining pattern. The footprints also failed to match the anatomy expected for dinosaurs. Their proportions, toe arrangement, and overall shape pointed elsewhere. Instead, they aligned most closely with a large crocodilomorph. That conclusion overturned the team's own earlier interpretation, replacing one unexpected explanation with another that seemed even more extraordinary. The age of the rocks transformed an unusual discovery into a profound evolutionary puzzle. 110 million years ago falls deep within the Cretaceous period, roughly 90 million years after the bipedal shuvosaurids of the Triassic had disappeared at the end-Triassic extinction. Their extinction had appeared complete. These footprints suggested that another crocodile relative had independently adopted a similar style of movement, or that an unknown branch had survived far longer than anyone had imagined. The discovery gained additional weight because another set of bipedal trackways from the nearby Hayman Formation, described in 2012, may represent a similar kind of animal. Together, these footprints hint that the crocodile lineage continued exploring possibilities long after paleontologists believed those experiments had ended, leaving behind only fleeting steps pressed into the mud. A trail of footprints can leave science balanced between two equally remarkable explanations. The impressions preserved in the rocks of South Korea are not uncertain. Their shape, spacing, and repeated pattern remain consistent across multiple trackways. The uncertainty lies with the animal that made them, because the feet crossed soft lakeshore mud, while the rest of the body disappeared into deep time. One possibility reaches backward across an immense span of history. It suggests that a lineage of bipedal crocodilomorphs survived the end-Triassic extinction and continued existing for roughly 90 million years without leaving a single body fossil that has yet been recognized. Paleontologists call such an absence a ghost lineage. The phrase does not imply anything supernatural. It describes an evolutionary branch predicted by evidence, even though its skeletal remains remain undiscovered. If this interpretation proves correct, generations of these animals crossed landscapes, reproduced, adapted, and endured while escaping the fossil record almost entirely. That idea may sound improbable, yet the fossil record has revealed long hidden lineages before. Fossilization depends on unusual circumstances. Most animals disappear without preserving bones, and many preserved rocks have never been exposed or carefully examined. Entire chapters of life's history survive only as scattered fragments, waiting for erosion or careful fieldwork to reveal them. A lineage lasting tens of millions of years without known skeletons would be extraordinary, although it would not violate the fundamental limits of paleontology. The second possibility points toward evolution's ability to revisit familiar solutions. In this interpretation, later crocodilomorphs independently evolved bipedal movement long after the earlier Triassic forms had vanished. Such repeated innovation is known as convergent evolution, the process through which unrelated or distantly related groups arrive at similar adaptations while following separate evolutionary paths. Wings appeared more than once. Streamlined marine bodies evolved repeatedly. A balanced, two-legged stride may belong on that growing list. If this explanation is correct, bipedalism was never a single historical experiment within the crocodile lineage. It became an option that natural selection could rediscover whenever changing environments favored speed, balance, or efficient movement across firm ground. Different ancestors, different ecosystems, and different evolutionary pressures could still produce a familiar style of locomotion through separate pathways. The debate recalls earlier discussions surrounding the Triassic predator Postosuchus. Some researchers once argued that its proportions might have allowed moments of bipedal movement, although later interpretations generally favored a four-legged stance. Even so, its body carried features showing how members of the crocodile lineage could approach that mechanical balance. The South Korean footprints revive those broader questions from an entirely different age. For now, the most careful answer remains the simplest one. The footprints are persuasive. The skeleton that produced them has not yet appeared. Future discoveries may connect those impressions to a known crocodilomorph, reveal an entirely new branch, or continue preserving the mystery. Each possibility remains grounded in evidence, while certainty waits within rocks that may still lie buried, preserving bones that have not yet met the light. Whatever conclusion eventually emerges, those narrow trails across the lakeshore reveal a lineage that continued surprising evolution long after its story seemed fully written. Seeing one creature at a time, the history of the crocodile lineage appears filled with strange detours. Seen across 250 million years, a different picture emerges. Shapes that once seemed unique begin returning again and again, rising from unrelated branches separated by immense stretches of time. The names change, the ancestors differ, and the continents drift apart, yet familiar designs continue to reappear as though life repeatedly discovers the same destinations. The earliest examples appeared long before the classic dinosaur world reached its full expression. During the Triassic period, Shuvosaurids moved across the land on two legs with balanced, bird-like strides. Much later, ornithomimid dinosaurs developed a remarkably similar way of running, despite belonging to an entirely different branch of the Archosaur family tree. Now, the South Korean footprints raise the possibility that bipedal crocodilomorphs appeared once again during the Cretaceous. Whether they belong to a surviving lineage or represented a fresh evolutionary experiment, the repeated arrival of the same body plan becomes difficult to ignore. A similar rhythm appears among plant eaters. The heavily armored aedosaurs of the Triassic disappeared during the end-Triassic extinction, carrying their distinctive form into history. Millions of years afterward, ankylosaurs spread across Jurassic and Cretaceous landscapes with protective armor covering their backs. Their ancestry differed, yet both groups answered the same challenge by turning their bodies into living fortresses against large predators. The pattern continues wherever the landscape offered familiar opportunities. Phytosaurs became masters of rivers and lakes during the Triassic, waiting beside the water with elongated jaws prepared for sudden attacks. Their disappearance left those habitats vacant until true crocodilomorphs eventually expanded into comparable roles. Large Rawasuchians once dominated terrestrial hunting before vanishing, after which theropod dinosaurs occupied the position of towering land predators. Even the open ocean reveals another repetition. Marine crocodilomorphs evolved streamlined bodies, flippers, and powerful tails, while ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, descended from entirely different reptilian ancestors, arrived at equally effective solutions for life far from shore. Such recurring designs illustrate convergent evolution on a grand scale. Within the crocodile lineage, convergence is woven through nearly every chapter instead of appearing as an occasional curiosity. Evolution repeatedly encounters the same environmental challenges, and natural selection repeatedly favors similar answers. The details differ, while the broader geometry remains recognizable across distant branches of life's history. This perspective also changes how the dinosaur age can be understood. Many of the body plans commonly associated with dinosaurs had crocodile-line predecessors that appeared earlier, flourished, and disappeared before comparable dinosaur forms became widespread. The later dinosaur expansion did not copy those earlier animals directly. Each lineage explored its own evolutionary path while arriving at solutions that often resembled one another because they answered the same physical demands. Movement follows the laws of mechanics. Predation obeys geometry, leverage, and timing. Defense reflects the balance between protection, mobility, and energy. Given enough opportunity, diverse lineages repeatedly converge upon forms that satisfy those constraints. Across millions of years, the crocodile lineage and the dinosaur lineage approached those problems from opposite directions, yet each arrived at many of the same enduring designs, revealing that evolution often invents less than it remembers. A river crocodile resting beneath the sun appears timeless, as though its form has always existed exactly as it does today. The fossil record tells a different story. That familiar outline is the final survivor of a lineage that once explored an astonishing range of shapes, diets, and ways of living before repeated waves of extinction gradually narrowed its possibilities. After the asteroid impact that ended the age of the non-avian dinosaurs, crocodilians entered the Paleocene and Eocene with more variety than survives today. Some developed long, slender jaws, specialized for catching fish. Others carried broad snouts, suited to a wider range of prey. Certain forms reached impressive sizes, while different branches occupied rivers, estuaries, and coastal waters. Although diminished from their Cretaceous diversity, the lineage still retained many evolutionary directions. Across the following tens of millions of years, those branches gradually disappeared. Earth entered a cooler phase during the Oligocene and Miocene. Tropical forests contracted as temperatures declined across much of the planet. Crocodilians depend upon external warmth to regulate body temperature, making their distribution closely tied to favorable climates. As warm environments retreated, suitable habitat became increasingly fragmented, leaving fewer places where large populations could persist over long periods. Another narrowing arrived during the Pleistocene ice ages. Expanding continental ice sheets reshaped rainfall, vegetation, and river systems while pushing warm conditions closer to the equator. Crocodilian populations became concentrated within shrinking tropical and subtropical regions. Many isolated groups vanished as climates shifted beyond the limits their physiology could tolerate. Ecology also continued changing around them. On land, mammals diversified into powerful predators, occupying niches once explored by crocodile relatives. In South America, the Cebicids remained successful terrestrial hunters long after many other crocodilomorphs had disappeared. Even those determined survivors eventually vanished, likely influenced by a combination of climatic change and increasing competition from expanding mammalian carnivores. Another distinctive branch closed, leaving fewer expressions of a lineage that had once seemed almost limitless. Today, only 28 recognized crocodilian species remain. 15 belong to the true crocodiles. 8 belong to the alligators and caimans. 3 belong to the gharials. 2 belong to the false gharials. Despite differences in size, behavior, and habitat, they share essentially the same underlying design. Each possesses an armored body carried on 4 limbs, a powerful tail, eyes positioned for watching from the water, and jaws adapted for ambush along freshwater or coastal margins. Compared with the Triassic world, the contrast becomes striking. That earlier chapter contained swift bipeds, armored herbivores, giant terrestrial predators, beaked runners, and formidable hunters of rivers and lakes. The Cretaceous introduced ocean swimmers, dog-like sprinters, plant-eating specialists with unexpected skulls, and towering predators waiting beside waterways. Those body plans represented hundreds of evolutionary experiments spread across countless ecosystems. The modern world preserves only one of those experiments. Its survival should not be mistaken for evidence that it was the perfect design. History suggests something subtler. Catastrophe repeatedly swept away the widest variety while sparing a smaller collection of adaptable generalists. Each extinction removed branches until a single architectural theme remained. The crocodilian body seen today is less a destination chosen by evolution than the enduring outline left after repeated chapters of loss erased nearly everything else. The story appears to narrow toward familiar crocodilians, yet one branch refused to follow the river. Long after the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, another lineage continued striding across dry ground with a confidence inherited from far older ancestors. The Sebasids carried forward a way of life that had nearly vanished from Earth, preserving the memory of terrestrial crocodile relatives well into the age of mammals. These animals belong to the Notosuchians, a remarkably varied group that had flourished during the Cretaceous. Most disappeared during the catastrophe that struck at the end of that period. The Sebasids endured. Isolated within South America for much of the early Cenozoic, they entered ecosystems where familiar dinosaur predators no longer existed, yet opportunities for large hunters remained. Their appearance bore little resemblance to the crocodilians resting along modern riverbanks. The skull rose high and deep instead of spreading low across the ground. Viewed from above, the head formed a narrow wedge with powerful jaw muscles anchored along its tall profile. This design favored strong slicing bites delivered on land, where struggling prey demanded different mechanics than animals seized in water. Their teeth reveal the same pattern. Each tooth carried sharp serrations along its edges, forming blades suited for cutting flesh. Paleontologists describe this arrangement as zyphodont dentition, a feature that evolved independently in several predatory lineages. The resemblance to the teeth of large theropod dinosaurs illustrates another example of convergent evolution, where separate branches arrive at similar solutions while traveling entirely different evolutionary paths. Everything about the skeleton suggests active pursuit across solid ground. The limbs supported the body well above the surface instead of sprawling outward. The proportions favored efficient movement over uneven terrain. These crocodile relatives occupied an ecological role unmatched within their broader lineage since the towering Rauisuchian predators of the Triassic. Across an immense span of time, the old terrestrial tradition found one final expression. South America offered conditions unlike those on other continents. Geographic isolation allowed distinctive animal communities to develop for millions of years. The Sebasids shared these landscapes with giant flightless predatory birds known as the terror birds. Together, they stood among the dominant hunters, representing two very different evolutionary histories converging upon the same position near the top of the food web. Among them, Baronassicus ranked as one of the largest. Estimates suggest it reached about 6 meters, which is about 19.7 miles. In length, that conversion is clearly incorrect. The correct comparison is about 19.7 feet, which is about 6 meters. Its size, muscular frame, and specialized skull made it one of the greatest terrestrial predators of its environment, demonstrating that formidable crocodile relatives still walked the land tens of millions of years after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Their long persistence eventually ended during the Miocene, around 12 million years ago. Shifting climates altered habitats across South America, while the gradual formation of the Isthmus of Panama allowed large mammalian predators from North America to enter the continent. Ecological pressures accumulated until the last Sebasids disappeared. Their extinction severed a thread stretching back almost 200 million years. From the first terrestrial crocodile relatives of the Triassic to the final Sebasids of the Miocene, one tradition endured through changing continents, changing climates, and repeated planetary upheaval. 12 million years may sound distant within a human lifetime, yet across evolutionary history it rests astonishingly close to the present. like the final page of a volume whose opening chapters began before the first dinosaurs had reached their height. Look closely at the animal resting beside a river, and a familiar outline begins to dissolve. The broad jaws, armored back, watchful eyes, and measured stillness seem to suggest permanence, as though this creature has remained untouched since the age of dinosaurs. The fossil record tells another story. The modern crocodile is neither a living fossil nor an unchanged relic. It is the latest expression of one of Earth's most inventive evolutionary lineages. The body plan, recognized today, reaches deep into the past. Semi-aquatic ambush hunting has served crocodile relatives since at least the Jurassic, proving itself again and again whenever rivers, swamps, and coastal wetlands offered opportunity. Even so, the lineage wearing that design has transformed more dramatically than almost any other group of backboned animals. Across 250 million years, crocodile relatives repeatedly abandon one successful form to explore another, filling environments that appear almost impossible when viewed through the narrow lens of the present. Those forgotten relatives ran across open ground on two legs with balanced, upright strides. Others carried toothless beaks, suited for gathering vegetation. Some developed streamlined bodies, flippers, and powerful tails for life, far from shore, crossing open seas with the confidence of marine hunters. Armored plant eaters wandered across Cretaceous landscapes, while agile runners pursued prey with movements recalling swift mammals. Towering predators waited beside waterways large enough to seize dinosaurs, and later descendants reclaimed dry land as dominant hunters after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Everyone belonged somewhere within the broader crocodile family tree. Seen across that immense history, the familiar form resting beside modern water is no longer the definition of a crocodile. It represents the branch that endured while countless alternatives disappeared. Repeated mass extinctions stripped away specialists occupying forests, plains, oceans, and coastlines. Each catastrophe narrowed the possibilities until one flexible design remained capable of surviving conditions that erased many others. The surviving shape did not triumph because it was the only one ever created. It persisted because it repeatedly endured the moments when entire worlds unraveled. That perspective transforms every familiar feature. The flattened body allows movement through water with little disturbance. Heavy armor protects vulnerable organs while doubling as support for powerful muscles. Eyes and nostrils, positioned high upon the head, permit nearly complete concealment beneath the surface. Patient stillness conserves precious energy between opportunities. None of these traits speaks of evolutionary simplicity. Together, they represent an architecture refined through repeated encounters with planetary upheaval. Within every living crocodilian rests a hereditary record extending far beyond its outward appearance. Hidden inside its genome are traces inherited from ancestors that sprinted across floodplains, crossed oceans, grazed on vegetation, stalked terrestrial prey, and explored ecological roles that no living crocodilian occupies today. Their bodies disappeared, yet fragments of their shared inheritance continued flowing through each surviving generation. The animal resting beside the water, therefore, carries far more than its own story. It embodies the residue of experiments repeated across uncountable generations, tested by extinction, climate change, shifting continents, and relentless competition. Its familiar silhouette is neither primitive nor ordinary. It is the final surviving design fashioned by a lineage that reinvented itself repeatedly until only one enduring form remained, still waiting where land and water meet. Watch a living crocodilian leave the water after sunrise, and for a brief moment, an older world rises with it. The body lifts from the ground, the limbs straighten beneath the torso, and each step carries its weight with surprising balance. The belly no longer drags across the earth. For several measured strides, the animal walks high above the ground, revealing a posture whose roots reach far deeper than the rivers it inhabits today. Every living crocodilian possesses this ability, whether a true crocodile, an alligator, a caiman, a gharial, or a false gharial. Each can perform what researchers call the high walk. It is not the posture these animals use most often. The familiar belly crawl demands less energy and serves well when slipping through mud, reeds, or shallow water. Even so, the capacity to rise remains present in every species. It has never disappeared. That persistence reflects more than habit. Powerful muscles support the lifted body, while the distinctive crurotarsal ankle provides stability and flexibility during each step. The nervous system contains the inherited patterns required to coordinate this upright gait. These features continue to function after countless generations because they were carried forward from ancestors that relied upon erect walking as an ordinary part of daily life. When a crocodilian performs a high walk, it briefly awakens a locomotor system that extends directly back to the upright crocodile line archosaurs of the Triassic. Those distant relatives crossed floodplains with their legs positioned beneath the body instead of sprawling outward. Their posture allowed efficient travel across land and opened ecological opportunities that later produced runners, giant predators, herbivores, and countless other forms already encountered throughout this story. The modern high walk, therefore, represents far more than an unusual movement. It preserves a living connection to an age when crocodile relatives stood confidently across terrestrial landscapes. Every lifted stride carries mechanical principles refined long before the familiar, semi-aquatic existence became the defining image of the lineage. The movement survives because evolution rarely discards a successful foundation if it continues serving useful purposes. Young crocodilians offer another intriguing glimpse into that inheritance. Some researchers have observed that hatchlings often move with a more upright posture during their earliest weeks. Their limbs sit farther beneath the body, and their movements appear comparatively agile. As they mature, increasing body mass encourages a lower stance that better supports their growing weight and aquatic lifestyle. The transition reflects changing demands throughout development while preserving the older locomotor pattern within the animal's repertoire. Those observations invite an intriguing comparison with the distant form known as Sonsilassicus, whose anatomy suggests an evolutionary path beginning on four legs before giving rise to habitual bipedal descendants. No living hatchling repeats that transformation. Development cannot replay millions of years with such precision. Even so, the youthful posture hints that the underlying architecture required for upright movement remains deeply embedded within the lineage. Across all the extinctions, reinventions, and narrowing pathways traced through the previous chapters, one lesson continues to emerge. Evolution seldom erases every trace of its earlier experiments. Useful structures are modified, redirected, or concealed beneath newer adaptations until changing circumstances reveal them again. The blueprint for upright movement was never truly lost. It endured inside bones, joints, muscles, and inherited neural circuits, waiting within every living crocodilian, not forgotten, only buried beneath the successful design that carried the lineage through the changing history of Earth. Imagine returning to a single interval in Earth's history around 201 million years ago, when the continents were still joined across enormous distances and deep fractures were beginning to split that immense landmass apart. Fire spread across those widening scars as the central Atlantic magmatic province released repeated waves of molten rock. The landscape changed through events governed by geology, each eruption adding another pulse to a transformation that would reshape the living world. Those eruptions possessed no purpose beyond the forces that produced them. Their intensity emerged from conditions within Earth's interior. Their reach depended on the geometry of opening crust, and the gases they released accumulated according to physical processes that neither anticipated nor favored any lineage. Carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide entered the atmosphere in immense quantities because the planet happened to unfold in that particular way at that particular moment. A slight difference in those circumstances could have altered everything that followed. Had the volcanic activity remained somewhat weaker, or had atmospheric carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide remained below critical environmental thresholds, many dominant crocodile relatives might have endured. Rawasakians could have continued ruling terrestrial predator niches. Shuvasaurids might have kept striding across floodplains. Adasaurs could have remained familiar grazers within broad seasonal landscapes. Their disappearance was not written into the fabric of evolution long before the eruptions began. In such a world, dinosaurs might have continued occupying comparatively modest ecological roles for many millions of years. They had already evolved impressive diversity, yet they still shared their environments with competitors that often held greater dominance. Without widespread vacancies opening across ecosystems, the opportunity for dramatic expansion may never have appeared. Evolution cannot occupy spaces that remain filled by thriving inhabitants. Every familiar giant from the later Mesozoic depended upon opportunities created through absence. Tyrannosaurs, sauropods, triceratops, stegosaurs, and velociraptors emerged because ecological roles became available after catastrophe removed those who occupied them before. Their success reflects remarkable evolutionary potential, although potential alone cannot guarantee history. It also requires circumstances that permit new experiments to flourish. Seen across immense spans of time, the celebrated Age of Dinosaurs rested upon an extraordinary chain of contingency. A continent happened to be breaking apart. Volcanoes erupted with sufficient duration and intensity to transform climates across the globe. Ecological communities crossed thresholds beyond which recovery followed unfamiliar paths. Countless later chapters unfolded from that combination of events, although none were predetermined before the first lava reached the surface. Evolution offers variation, tests it against changing conditions, and preserves whatever remains capable of reproducing within altered worlds. It does not prepare champions before the contest begins. Strength may help, specialization may succeed for immense periods, and dominance may appear permanent. Yet, catastrophe judges according to entirely different rules. Flexible generalists often persist because they can continue living after familiar environments disappear, while highly specialized forms lose the conditions that once supported their success. The history traced through the crocodile lineage carries that lesson with unusual clarity. For millions of years, its relatives stood among the dominant architects of terrestrial ecosystems. Then chance altered the stage beneath their feet. Their story turned upon events no organism could anticipate or influence. If the history of life resembles a coin tossed into the air, the crocodile relatives called heads. When it finally settled upon the ground, it revealed tails, and the world that followed grew from that single, uncertain landing. Picture Earth's history as though every chapter could be wound backward, every extinction reversed, every footprint erased until only possibility remained. The paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould once imagined replaying life's entire story from the beginning, asking whether familiar creatures would appear once more or whether an entirely different world would emerge. Among the countless fossils scattered across deep time, the crocodile lineage offers one of the clearest opportunities to consider that remarkable thought. Its record suggests that evolution often arrives at the same destination by different roads. Early members of the crocodile lineage explored upright running bodies long before similar forms flourished among dinosaurs. Those pioneers disappeared, yet later dinosaur groups independently occupied comparable ecological roles with strikingly similar proportions, balance, and movement. The resemblance emerged across separate branches of the tree of life because both lineages encountered comparable physical challenges while pursuing comparable opportunities. The pattern extends well beyond swift runners. Armored herbivores first appeared among crocodile relatives during the Triassic, carrying heavy protective coverings while feeding on vegetation. After those forms vanished, armored dinosaurs evolved their own defensive architecture through entirely separate ancestry. Semi-aquatic ambush hunters followed a comparable path. Phytosaurs developed elongated jaws and lifestyles centered on river margins before disappearing at the end of the Triassic. Much later, true crocodilians evolved another version of that same successful design through a different evolutionary route. Even the story of walking on two legs may have unfolded more than once within the crocodile lineage itself. Triassic shuvosaurids traveled with an upright bipedal posture before extinction closed their chapter. Around 90 million years later, the remarkable trackways preserved in South Korea hint that another crocodile relative may once again have moved across mud using only its hind limbs. Bones have not yet confirmed the identity of that track maker, although the footprints themselves remain persuasive evidence that such a possibility deserves careful attention. Across these repeated patterns, body plans begin to resemble enduring answers instead of singular inventions. Evolution does not assign ownership of an effective design to one family forever. It discovers workable arrangements whenever comparable conditions reward them. The proportions required for efficient running arise from biomechanics. Defensive armor reflects recurring solutions to predation. Streamlined aquatic hunters follow principles shaped by water resistance, muscle power, and feeding efficiency. These forms emerge because physical reality consistently favors certain arrangements under similar circumstances. Time supplies countless opportunities to test those arrangements. Whenever extinction opens ecological space, surviving lineages begin exploring possibilities that earlier inhabitants once occupied. Given sufficient diversity, sufficient variation, and sufficient opportunity, natural selection repeatedly uncovers familiar architectures. Bipeds return, heavy armor returns, ocean swimmers return, patient hunters at the water's edge return. Each appearance comes through different ancestry, although the destination often resembles one reached long before. The crocodile lineage demonstrates this principle with unusual clarity because its history spans repeated cycles of expansion, collapse, and renewal. It assembled comparable solutions more than once within its own family, then watched unrelated dinosaur descendants arrive at many of those same solutions again. The recurring shapes, scattered across deep time, suggest that evolution is creative within boundaries established by physics, movement, and survival. Rewind the tape often enough, and the cast may change, yet many of the roles seem destined to be filled once again. Watch a living crocodile for long enough, and the present begins to blur into a far older world. A saltwater crocodile drifting through an Australian estuary, a Nile crocodile resting along a riverbank, or an American alligator floating among cypress roots all appear to belong entirely to this moment. Yet every one of them descends from ancestors that once crossed Triassic floodplains with upright limbs, elevated bodies, and a confidence shaped on dry ground long before dinosaurs reached their greatest diversity. Those distant ancestors did not vanish without leaving traces behind. Their legacy remains woven into the living anatomy of every crocodilian. The genetic instructions that once supported longer limbs, an erect stance, and even the possibility of moving on two legs have never disappeared completely. Evolution rarely erases successful designs outright. More often, it preserves them beneath newer layers, reducing their expression while retaining the deeper blueprint for future generations. That inheritance still reveals itself in fleeting moments. A crocodilian performing its high walk lifts its body clear above the ground, placing each foot beneath its weight in a posture that reaches back across immense spans of time. When one explodes from still water in a brief burst of speed, muscles and joints cooperate through mechanisms inherited from ancestors built for a wider range of movement than their modern descendants usually display. Young hatchlings often carry themselves with a more upright gait before increasing size gradually shifts their posture toward the familiar sprawling stance seen in adulthood. These behaviors resemble faint echoes carried across hundreds of millions of years. They do not recreate the Triassic exactly, nor do they transform living crocodilians into their distant relatives. Instead, they hint that evolutionary history remains layered within every surviving body. Features no longer used as a primary way of life can persist, waiting beneath more recent adaptations like old foundations supporting a newer structure. Across 250 million years, the crocodile lineage experimented with astonishing variety. Swift runners crossed open landscapes. Plant eaters carried beaks instead of slicing teeth. Ocean hunters shaped themselves for open water. Heavy armored browsers defended themselves with reinforced bodies. Land predators pursued prey far from rivers, while other relatives developed forms resembling swift mammals more than living crocodiles. Each design flourished for a time before changing climates, shifting continents, or global catastrophes brought another chapter to its close. Repeated extinction acted as an unforgiving filter, removing one possibility after another until only a single enduring architecture remained widespread. The broad skull, armored hide, powerful tail, and patient life beside warm waterways were not preserved because they represented perfection in every environment. They endured because this combination repeatedly carried its owners through planetary upheaval that eliminated countless alternatives. Modern crocodilians, therefore, stand as survivors rather than relics. They are the latest expression of a lineage that has continually adapted while carrying fragments of every earlier transformation within its biological inheritance. When one waits beside the water with almost complete stillness, the posture belongs to today, while the deeper story stretches beyond dinosaurs, beyond mammals, beyond flowering plants, grasses, and butterflies, into an age when the first architects of this remarkable family began exploring the world on upright limbs. Get comfortable. Where we are going, the rivers remember,